Hollow Knight is pretty cool. Despite not really playing a ton of Metroidvanias prior to it, Hollow Knight cemented my adoration of the genre. I love the rhythmic flow of getting from upgrade to upgrade, the feeling of discovering a new area for the first time, slowly working up my strength to best the next major encounter, the way combat encourages you to get a feel for the recoil of your weapon, the sound when you parry. I love the music, the atmosphere. I could go on, but I don't necessarily think making a video just gushing about Hollow Knight is up my alley. I could talk about the seamless world design or the ways progression is gated both through skill or strength checks, movement item requirements, or a neat blend of both like with the Brooding Moloch. But instead, I want to focus on what those of you outside the Hollow Knight fandom are likely already familiar with, the constant questioning over where Silksong is. For those who don't know, I'm releasing this video just before Hollow Knight Silksong releases, after an agonizing 6.5-year wait, most of which was spent completely in the dark on whether or not Team Cherry was even still working on the game. If you saw my Heartbound video, and let's be real, you probably did, then you probably already see where this is heading, but I'll put a pin in that discussion for now, because I need to give a little bit of context. Hollow Knight Silksong began development as a free DLC for Hollow Knight that would add Hornet as a playable character to the base game, presumably with a completely new moveset and a new story. The problem here was kinda obvious. Hollow Knight is built around the knight. Hornet is too tall to fit in certain gaps, she would need her moveset to cover literally every piece of ground the knight can, enemies designed around her, unique dialogue with NPCs. What started off as a seemingly simple project became much more complicated when Team Cherry realized just how well made their own world is. A brand new character would have a lot of trouble navigating and fighting through it since it was so well designed around the knight. Essentially, with each of these problems, it meant that the expansion would have to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it hit a point where the scope got so large that they just decided to make a new game instead. And so, on February 14th, 2019, about 6.5 years ago now, Hollow Knight Silksong was revealed. The second trailer was in August of 2025. Hi, Editor River here. Quick little note, I forgot a trailer that came out about 3 years ago, so my statement was a little incorrect. And by a little, I mean a lot. Sorry about that. Yeah, the silence on Silksong's development was deafening. Fans were hard-pressed to get any concrete news on Silksong until April of this year during the Switch 2 Direct, when some new footage and a 2025 release window was teased. Misleading tweets from other companies, mysterious Steam page updates with seemingly nothing of note, but most notably, near complete and utter radio silence on the development of Silksong from Team Cherry was maddening to the fanbase. Before I give my opinions on the matter, I want to go over some notable effects and issues that sprung up from all this. The most obvious was the subject of many memes and mini rants, both from in and outside the fandom, and that was the fact that we couldn't go any major game presentation, whether it be the Game Awards, Nintendo Directs, whatever the hell Xbox does, what have you, without Silksong fans preemptively swarming it with speculation on news, only to get nothing again and again and again. When a fanbase becomes desperate enough for any indication of progress, they get a little antsy when there's even a possibility of news. There's a reason why there's a YouTube channel dedicated to daily Silksong news. I know I mentioned trailers before, but going on to Hollow Knight's Kickstarter page, you can see that Silksong's reveal was update number 71. There was another update a few months later after E3, and then update 73 was a few days ago, confirming that the game is almost out. We went straight from no idea if Silksong was even being worked on to a 2025 confirmation to the game being out in a couple of weeks out of the blue. I want to briefly touch on a question I've seen asked before. Is the Silksong fandom ungrateful? I mean, all they had to do was wait 6.5 years. That's not the worst development cycle, honestly, especially for a game where the development period overlapped with COVID. Ask Kingdom Hearts fans what a really bad development cycle looks like. But to cut to the chase, I'm not a fan of how Team Cherry handled the response to the wait. Don't get me wrong, people complaining that it's taking a while can at least certainly come off as impatient, ungrateful, that whole mess, but I'd be lying if I said that at times it didn't feel warranted. There isn't a disconnect between Team Cherry and their fans in the same way that there is with AAA game devs. I don't mean to say that they are obligated to share with the class, but it's not like there's an NDA stopping them from saying the game's still in development every few months. Fucking Pirate Software does that, and even if it seems like he's lying, he does still throw up a facade of working. That isn't to say that everyone would be satisfied with a tweet just saying, yep, the game is in development, don't worry, but To bring up the Heartbound video again, it would sure as hell satisfy the more reasonable members of the fanbase. The fact is, the stretches of no new information following the reveal of Silksong were disheartening, especially since, again, we got updates for the first couple months following the reveal. It was so bad the Daily Silksong news guy considered quitting just before we did finally get news. You can hear the difference in their voice.
Today is March 31st, 2025.
Today is April 2nd, 2025. This is our your host for...
None of that is to say that Team Cherry is obligated to give any information. And again, with a development cycle this long, some people will be genuinely insatiable. But at times, it felt like Team Cherry was more interested in messing with fans than keeping them content. Do I need to mention the fact that the teaser for when Silksong would get a release window was a series of reviews on a cake recipe that was posted a year before the Switch 2 Direct? And don't get me wrong, was this funny? Absolutely. But it's hard to read it as anything other than poking the bear. People were so starved for news that William Pellin and Ari Gibson reviewing a cake sent the community into a genuine multi-month frenzy. I get how the Silksong fandom could come off as annoying and overreactive from the outside perspective, but as someone who got into Hollow Knight pretty shortly after Silksong's announcement, I can definitely see how it all happened. Again, there isn't that usual disconnect with Team Cherry and their fans in the same way that there is for larger devs. There's no NDAs, massive layers of corporate censoring, and the like to stop these guys from even just giving a short tweet that says, yeah, it's still being worked on. I already said in the Heartbound video that lack of communication is the leading killer when it comes to having to wait for something. They say no news is good news, but no news means all people really have to go off of is assuming goodwill in Team Cherry. It's certainly better than being directly lied to. In case I made it seem that way earlier, let me be clear that I don't think the development of Heartbound was better than Silksong's. I also used Silksong as an example of a bad development cycle in that video. That was before we got a release date, but you get the idea. There's a point where radio silence feels a little too intentional, as if it's asking you to question why they wouldn't say everything's fine. Is something wrong? At least in the case of Silksong, unlike say Heartbound or Omori, the game didn't have a Kickstarter, so people didn't already have money sunk into a project with zero notable updates. There wasn't the issue of sunk cost. People spent time waiting, of course, but nobody really had skin in the game outside of Team Cherry themselves. And that's really what allows me to understand their position. As a Silksong fan, I was understandably peeved from the lack of communication, but I also understand that they were really the only people with anything to lose in this situation. It's why I don't take the long development and lack of information nearly as hard as I did for Heartbound, despite being more excited for Silksong. It's been interesting to get more and more info about the development as the floodgates have slowly opened up. Hearing how the development took so long, largely because it was just so fun to make that they kept adding more to it, how we'll likely get more expansions similar to Hollow Knight, and confirming my suspicions from earlier, how Team Cherry thought more frequent updates would sour people to the long development. I understand not wanting to reveal more about the game to keep as much of it a mystery as possible, but in my opinion, the silence was a bit too far. There's a balance to these things, and I don't think Team Cherry struck it right. I understand that you'll never be able to please everyone, but I think the game struggled from a multitude of issues. For one, I think a majority of the fanbase would be satisfied with, hell, even yearly updates just saying the game is still making progress. But second, I think this game committed the Kingdom Hearts 3 and 4 sin of revealing itself too early. It's a little funny to hear that the reason for the long development is because it was too much fun. Really the first instance I've heard of a game being in development heaven, so to speak, though it does sound like, similar to Omori, because I need to bring that game up in every video I make, the scope of the project outgrew their expectations and they underestimated how long it would take. That may be why there were so few updates. They may not have had a good idea of when the game would be done. In fact, in their interview with Jason Schreier, I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, Ari Gibson said that he had to stop himself from drawing just because the game would take too long if he kept everything. This is also where Gibson said they worried saying that they were still working on it without much to show for it would sour people since they had no clue when they'd be done, to the point where part of why the game is coming out now is because they realized that they had to put a pin in it and say, this is enough for now, and that they'll add more through updates. It's also kind of interesting to hear that COVID didn't really impact development, since it contributes to my closing remark. Silksong has been in development for nearly 7 years, with little to no slowdown. The interview makes it sound like the first trailer was from relatively early in production, so I have no doubt running through my mind that we have every reason to be extremely optimistic going into Silksong. And it sounds like what we're getting on release is not everything they have in store for us. Only time will tell if the wait was worth it, but I have no reason to believe it won't be. It sounds like their ambition has only grown since development started. We'll see if it plays out for them. Hollow Knight has sold nearly 4 times as many copies as it did since the announcement of Silksong. The community has undergone an agonizing wait and a tremendous amount of growth, but the sun is rising over the horizon. I suppose in the context of Hollow Knight that's actually a bad thing. Let me rephrase. Hollow Knight Silksong's development has been a bit difficult to sit through, and I stand by my point that communication would have made the situation much better, but thankfully, the wait is now over and the community's patience should be rewarded very soon. I've seen this fandom endure a development cycle that was somehow much harder on the fans than the developers from the sounds of it, though I don't necessarily envy Team Cherry's anxiety about reaching out to their fans. I understand their concerns though, and let's hope we can put that period behind us as we depart for Pharloom. So subscribe if you want me to make a Silksong video. God really made me a Deltarune, Hollow Knight, and Kingdom Hearts fan, didn't he? And all for what? A little bit of witchcraft?